This is the Shift Podcast.
Hey, it's John. Thanks for checking out the Shift Weekend Podcast. On the show tonight, we talk with Danny Huntley, one of the hosts from the Broadcast Podcast, an all-female hockey podcast, on her excitement for the upcoming season, but then a deeper conversation on the harassment that she and the other hosts of the Broadcast face on a daily basis. Why? Simply because they are women in hockey media. Plus, a further discussion with Brian Douglas, the creator of the 5 a.m. project aimed at shining a spotlight on Canada's overnight workers who help keep the economy moving forward, aka you, the shift head. Now, before we go into any further hockey discussion, there's just one question, which is, have you heard of the Broadcast Podcast? This is a podcast featuring 5 women who love hockey. They watch the game, they have strong, well-informed opinions, and then they share it with the rest of the world through their podcast. They are Samantha Chang, Georgia Twists, Vanessa Jang, there's no relation, Mallory McFall, and Danny Huntley. 4 of them based in Vancouver. Mallory lives in Kansas City. They are the Broadcast. And while I would love to say that this podcast has been unanimously welcomed by hockey fans all over, the ugly truth is that while they have a lot of supporters, including me, including Jody Vance, they also deal with a shocking amount of vile hatred. Trolls that often attack their character, using the most vulgar language, sexually harassing them, and this is happening every day behind the scenes. I can't do justice the experiences that they go through, which is why I have invited Danny to join us on the show tonight to talk about that herself. Danny Huntley, welcome to The Shift.
Thank you so much, and thanks for having me.
Now, before we get started, the Broadcast Podcast, which it's the best name I think any podcast could have come up with. Let us know just a little bit about the background information, like who you guys are, or rather who you ladies are, and what this podcast is supposed to be about, and what it ended up almost becoming, really.
Yeah, so we're just a group of 5 girls. We met on Twitter, actually. When we started the podcast, we never met in person and didn't know each other, which people don't really believe, but yeah, that's true. And yeah, we just, being on Twitter, there was no real like voice we could relate to. We felt like it was important to have women speak up, and especially in Vancouver, and have our voices represented. So that's kind of why we started it. And once we did start it, we kind of had Vanessa. She tweeted out a video, like a promo video on our Broadcast account. And it kind of just took off and blew up from there. So we were kind of like, oh God, we have to perform now because there's so many eyes on us. And then we just kind of did our first episode. A lot of people listened, and yeah, we were surprised how many people listened and keep listening as well. We kind of just thought we might have like 100 listeners or so, and just like our own little like kind of connects Twitter girls thing. But it's been a lot more than that, and we've been pleasantly surprised.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely took off. As you say, most of you are located in Vancouver, although not all of you are located in Vancouver. Actually, not all of you are even located in Canada, for that measure. So this is supposed to be, I think, originally like a Vancouver-based hockey podcast, but then it just started taking off because you realized this was so important, having this opportunity where women could talk about hockey and talk about hockey really, really well. I mean, I worked in sports radio, and I can tell you it's not always an easy way to just even get into the industry. But what I really admire about the Broadcast Podcast is that you understand that there isn't a lot of other shows like yours, and you want to not just make it known that, hey, we're doing this because we realize there was a vacuum and we wanted to fill that vacuum, but there's also other women out there who might have always been hockey fans, but maybe we're too intimidated to try and do anything like this because there just wasn't a precedent for this before. Or they were scared off because every time you turn on the TV, anytime you turn on the radio and an analyst comes on, 99% of the time it's a man. And it's usually a white man. So there isn't always this feeling of diversity and inclusiveness when it comes to hockey.
Yeah, that's right. And that's one of the things we have at times faced a lot of adversity from some of the male critics who just just want to, are there just to criticize us. But hearing from a lot of the girls and women out there who listen to us and find us important, that's really what keeps us going. And we find it to be really rewarding that way.
Now, I've had the pleasure of working with some of the most incredible women broadcasters at 980 CKNW across the Chorus Radio Network, and I know for a fact that somebody like Jody Vance is such a huge fan of the Broadcast podcast, and she was so jealous when I ended up ordering one of your merchandise sweaters, and Jody was like, "Where's mine? Where's mine? Where's mine?" So I know you've got a ton of fans, not just across the hockey sphere, but across the entire industry. So keep on doing what you're doing. Now, hold that thought in terms of your experience with the podcast so far, because a brand new hockey season is upon us. It's really the second full season, or even like a weird season that the broadcast is finally going to be a part of. You're going to be cataloging the season as the year goes along here. So how excited are you that hockey's back? It's a weird condensed season. There's a whole Canadian division. It's COVID-19. It's really weird, but we got hockey back, Danny. That's got to feel good.
It totally feels good. I'm so excited to watch hockey again, and having to watch it on back-to-back nights to kick the season off was such a reward for us, I feel like, because there's not much to do, let's be honest, right now. You kind of just like go to work, go home, and maybe like Zoom with your friends or just like watch TV, do whatever. But having hockey back is just so nice, and it just is something to look forward to at the end of the day too.
Yeah, no, 100%. And the other night, actually last night, I couldn't even watch the second back-to-back Canucks game because I had a dentist appointment. So I've been getting some heat on Twitter about that because they were like, "Why? Who does a 7 p.m. dentist appointment?" I don't know, man. That's just kind of the way the cards fell. But in terms of the season outlook here, there's a lot of excitement because, at least here in Vancouver, the Canucks, they've got a pretty young team. A lot of Toronto fans that are listening right now probably thinking, well, we got a pretty good young team. And then a lot of Oilers fans in Edmonton thinking, well, we got a pretty solid young team. So if I asked you to gaze into your crystal ball and just sort of make a prediction, which team do you think is really the one to watch out for in this brand new Canadian division?
Yeah, I think the Leafs will be a really tough team to play against. They have a lot of experience now. I know they do go out in the playoffs often in the first round, but I do think they'll definitely finish first in the North Division. And then after them, I feel like it kind of is just anybody's game from there. I think it'll really depend on who can stay healthy, and that will really help determine who's going to finish second, third, fourth.
And that's not just like avoiding broken bones and things like that. That's like avoiding COVID-19, which is going to be a huge challenge. And we know teams like the Dallas Stars, they haven't done a great job of that just to even start the year. So I think you have a really great point about just staying healthy. If I asked you to go the other way and ask you to burn a Canadian city here and be like, which Canadian team is going to be the worst? Do we kind of already know which team is probably going to be the worst here?
Yeah, I feel like it's going to be Ottawa. Definitely. They do have some great young prospects and up-and-comers like Tim Stützle, and they'll be exciting to watch for sure, but I just think they will finish last again. It'll be another, rough year for the Sens fans.
Don't feel too bad. I mean, Eugene Melnyk knows exactly what he's getting into every year, and Senators fans will tell you themselves, like, come on, Eugene, open up the wallet just a little bit, man. But that's kind of the way that Ottawa goes. And, I think you're right. Between Toronto, predicted to be one of the top teams in the Canadian division, and then the Senators predicted to be one of the worst, it's really just anyone's guess in between. You could see Vancouver, you could see Calgary, Edmonton, Winnipeg, I think deserves a special look. There's a bunch of ways the season could go into. So I'm glad we at least got your predictions on number one and whichever team might finish last. Now, Danny, the conversation about what the experience has been like for the broadcast. I wish that I could ask you about all of the nonstop, like, positive feelings and positive messages of support that you've been getting from hockey fans, but we know that's not entirely the case. And I feel like doing what you're doing with the broadcast takes a special level of mental health and resilience because of what you're hearing from haters all the time. Share with us just some of those really difficult experiences when you're dealing with trolls and sexist and sexual harassment and things of all that nature.
Yeah, it was kind of shocking at first. Like, I did expect some people to obviously go like have blowback and criticism towards us for sure. But I wasn't expecting the level or amount of trolls to come at us. Like we have people make fake accounts for us as our podcast account, as people will be like us personally. And like I tweeted something, someone didn't like it, and they called my work line actually.
Wow.
Yeah, and that's never okay. Like you can disagree with me, unfollow me, block me, whatever you want online, that's fine. But I feel like when you're crossing that line, that's never okay. And I do feel like at the time it really did like bother me that, and I did take a break off social media for my mental health. And I did feel like that was really important. But I do feel like it is more important to keep going and keep going out there for all the women and girls, because it is important to have our voices heard despite having all the trolls and the haters come at us like that. And I think it is important to shine a light on it as well and let people know this is happening so it happens to less people.
I'm sorry that you go through these experiences, and I know you're not alone. The entire broadcast often deals with these messages and harassment from cowards, and that's really what it is. Because a lot of these accounts that are coming at you, they are anonymous in nature, right? It's people that hide behind faceless accounts. They don't share any details about who they are personally, and so they have this free roam to just say the worst things that, you know, if they met you in person, they would never have the guts to say. Because, I mean, that's just that would be a sociopath if anyone was able to do that. And honestly, they are sociopaths because they even do it on Twitter. So again, I'm so sorry that you deal with this, but you know, when you hear like a hockey analyst or a sports radio host take criticism for the things they say, the difference between that and what you face is, first of all, chances are these people are men, but also they're paid to get a little bit of hot reactions from people. They're given benefits packages. They're given really nice salaries to deal with the crap that people throw at them online. Whereas, again, a reminder, the Broadcast Podcast is a passion project. So this is something that you and the rest of the team do on a volunteer basis because you love the game. And it just sucks that what you love to do and this energy and this excitement you had for the podcast, it gets met with so much criticism from people that honestly have a lot of unfounded things to say. It's not even the fact that they think your takes are bad necessarily. It's simply the fact, to me, when I look at it from the outside, they just seem totally uncomfortable and unprepared that a bunch of women who are highly educated and follow the game as much as they do are all of a sudden getting more attention on social media with their hockey takes than they are. And then they feel like, oh, like what's wrong with me? And then they take it out on you. It's disgusting. And again, I'm so sorry that you have to deal with that.
Yeah. Thank you for saying that. Yeah, it has been rough, but like I have been getting used to it, as crappy as that is to say. You never want to get used to that. But yeah, it's just something you just I'm more aware of now. I don't like the first time like it kind of happened, I was more shocked and like taken back by it. But now I feel like ready for the haters and just prepared to deal with it. And I do think it is important to take breaks and monitor your mental health to make sure that it's not getting out of hand.
It's one of the pillars of our show, is just always reinforcing the importance of mental health awareness, and not just saving that conversation for one day out of the year like some companies do, although it's a noble cause, but reminding people that, hey, there's a lot of people out there right now that are still struggling with things right now, and there's a lot of reasons for that, COVID-19 of course being one of the biggest ones. And so I appreciate you giving us some time here, Danny, and before we let you go, and I'll remind people, like, this conversation, it's important, it's heavy, it's the ugly truth what hockey fandom really looks like, but the broadcast is fun. And I think before we let you go, we got to plug again, just like what people can expect when they listen into an episode of the broadcast. It's not all like analytics and numbers and heavy stats. You guys have found this very important way of digesting hockey information, but doing it in a really, really fun way. And you implement like pop culture. So just tell us, like, if you had never heard the Broadcast Podcast before, what would be the one thing that you would want to tell people about?
It's a lot of fun. If you love just sports and having fun, basically, that is the Broadcast Podcast. We had actually Roman Yossi and Mark Browecki on, and Roman Yossi himself said we are a lot of fun. So you guys should check that episode out, definitely, and listen to how fun we are.
He is the captain of the Nashville Predators, one of the top defensemen in the game today. So that's solid endorsement right there. I could say 1,000 things, and I still wouldn't get the same cachet as a Roman Josi compliment. So well done. Well done. And Danny, thank you again for joining us. This is the first time I've had a member of the Broadcast podcast on the show, and also the first time I've had a 49ers fan on the show. So as a Seahawks fan, this was a difficult interview. But,
yes, definitely. But you did a lot better this season than we did, that's for sure.
Fair enough. We'll see what happens next year, though. Danny, thanks so much for your time, and best of luck with the podcast moving forward.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me on.
This is the Shift Podcast.
But for now, let's get into this conversation. We got a very special guest joining us now. For transparency, I will share this. Earlier this week, I was thinking about what are we going to talk about on the show tonight? And I was going through the internet, as I do, looking for topics, news stories, things that caught my eye. And I saw this great article on Huffington Post Canada. It was written by Seema Shakeri. And the headline reads, "Inside the Night Shift, photos that show the thankless jobs that keep society running." And I knew almost right away this was going to be very interesting. And as I read more about this story, it detailed this project that was put together by a photographer named Brian Douglas, who's based out of Ontario. And like the title says, Brian's goal with the 5 a.m. project is to shine a light on the Nighthawks, the overnighters, basically everyone listening right now, and wanting to give you a chance to enjoy the spotlight. So without further ado, it's my pleasure to welcome Brian Douglas onto the show. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm really excited for this conversation tonight.
Yeah. So, as I was saying, it's such a fascinating project because, first of all, I do think you're absolutely dead on when you say it's mostly thankless. And the people that work these overnight shifts probably understand that. Like when you first think about working a particular line of work or career, and you think, well, I'm probably going to overnights, you realize pretty quickly that most of society it doesn't compute for them because they work 9 to 5s, they're in bed by 9 or 10 at night, and they're sound asleep when the rest of us are kind of operating and going through our work every night. So what, first of all, made you curious about wanting to catalog with the 5 a.m. project?
Yeah, so it kind of came out of another project I was working on. So I live in Kitchener-Waterloo in Ontario. And when we first moved to the area, so that was about 10 years or so ago. My wife grew up in the area, but I lived north of Toronto. So when we got married, we moved back here. We were living in an old loft, and it was an old shoe factory, the Kaufman Shoe Factory, so the Kaufman Lofts. And we were in the heart of kind of downtown Kitchener. Surrounded everywhere I could look, there was industrial factories that were sitting empty, and I was doing photography long before we moved, but I was always interested in urban exploration. So I started finding my way into some of these factory spaces, and sort of documenting the spaces, knowing that many of them were set to be demolished or they were going to be kind of renovated and turned into kind of tech hubs. So my goal at that point was, let's document these spaces as they sit today, so that we have a little bit of a record of what these spaces were. Because Kitchener, like lots of people now, they think Kitchener-Waterloo tech and Google and all of that. But what they don't realize is it was very much a heavy industry community. And that's kind of what founded it. So I wanted to kind of document that. So when you're in these giant factory spaces, I mean, there's an eeriness to it in one sense, because you're just this small little person in this giant space. But then I really started thinking about how busy these spaces would have been at one point in time. I mean, it was a time when people they got a job and they were there for their careers, like 20, 30, 40 years, right? So I was just thinking about those people, the hard work, the line work, just really starting to get really interested and fascinated about the stories that would have existed within the walls of those spaces. But knowing I was decades too late to capture those people. So as that project was kind of wrapping up, factory spaces were dwindling. I was talking to my wife because work and industry became fascinating to me as a focus for my photography. Saying I want to carry this I want to continue focusing on industry. I think it's really important. I don't think it's given enough appreciation. And she said, well, what about night shift workers? And as soon as it was out of her mouth, I was like, all right, I'm in, I'm done. And I started compiling a list of things that were just popping off the top of my head, of where can I start? Who can I photograph? Who can I find? And that's kind of how it developed, from being in those empty spaces and curious and wondering about the people to finding a segment of the working industry that is rarely, if ever, seen.
Mm-hmm. It's really mind-boggling when you think about how things have changed, and your point about how that town has changed. I can relate to it because in Vancouver, Gastown, I'm not sure if you've ever had the chance to visit, but Gastown is predominantly a very tourist-heavy area now. But if you go way back in the birth of Vancouver, it was one of the first real settlements as they were working out of the port. And so Gastown has this really eclectic mix now of tourist shops, tech startups like you were talking about. But also, if you walk just a few blocks further north towards the sea, then you get still heavy industry and still port workers there. So it's really a fascinating mix. So it's probably a story that a lot of people can relate with, whether you're in BC or Ontario, throughout the prairies, if you're in Alberta. There's always these parts of the province and parts of different cities that have seen these mishmash of old tech and old industry and the new age things that are starting to take over and starting to take shape. But I know that factories aren't the only sort of stories that you were cataloging with this 5 a.m. project. And it's kind of fascinating just to see all the different kinds of workers that you kind of wanted to sort of catalog and just maybe get a glimpse into their story. So did you have a chance to speak with these people and directly and just sort of ask questions like, you know, when you do the things that you do, how do you do it all the time knowing that most of the country just can't acknowledge what you're doing on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah, so when I started the project, like before I even took the first picture or before I even sent out the first, attempt to make contact with anybody, I kind of had a list of questions that I kind of developed in my mind that I wanted to ask, in terms of what is it that they do, how long have they done it, and just what their general feelings and thoughts were on the night shift. Like, did they like it? What was good about it? What was difficult about it? Because that was what I was quite curious about. And you're right. I've documented about close to 40 people now. I was very specific, not just to focus on factories, because I could have easily probably found 40 factories that had some sort of a night shift. But I think when I was kind of developing this project, I think that's kind of what people automatically assume when they think of night shift. They think factory workers, doing some sort of a line work. And yes, that is accurate in one respect, but there's so many other industries and so many other people working. So I wanted to really honor and highlight as many different industries and different careers as I could. So everything from overnight bakers, 911 dispatch, dairy farmer, taxi driver. I went to like a shelter worker, a brewer. That was a great one, going to the brewery in the middle of the night.
I bet, yeah.
Paramedics, cookie factory. I did do some heavy industry. So, it was a nice eclectic mix for sure. Like a housekeeper at a retirement home. So yeah, a good eclectic mix. And that's just a few of them, right? So, and what the conversations kind of developed from that is, I think I realized people either loved it or hated it. The people who seemed to really love it, they were the people who were straight nights. They'd been doing it, some of them, I think, 25, 30 years straight nights. But people who seem to really struggle, and maybe some of your listeners can really relate to this, is the shift work, the when it switches.
Right.
Going from days to nights. I had lots of conversations with people about how difficult that is just on their bodies, just to try and flip their sleep pattern back into, the normal 9 to 5 rhythm, and then flip back to the night. Just so hard on them. And some of them, again, had been doing it for years and years. And they were also the ones who tended to speak around how hard it was in terms of kind of family and social, that because the flip was so hard on them personally, it made it hard for them to truly engage at times with their friends, with their families, and just to have a sense of normalcy in their life.
Yeah, I mean, one of the pillars on our show is being completely honest and transparent about certain ways that people go through a lot of struggles in life. And we've talked at length about the importance of raising and continuing the conversation of mental health awareness. And I think that's such a big point that you're bringing up, because when people choose, or maybe they don't always get to choose, but when you do work overnights, you often have to make sacrifices, because again, the bulk of society doesn't operate that way. So your point about maintaining a social life, that is very difficult to do, and it's often things that you have to let go. You don't see friends for months at a time. It's very difficult to see family, maybe even during the holidays. And I know right now with COVID-19, everything's a little bit tough, and it's a little strange for most of us, all of us. But for those that do work the overnight shifts, it's never easy to just be like, hey, let's catch up. Sure, are you free at 9 a.m.? Because that's when I'm off work, and I'll be totally cool by then. It's just not feasible for a lot of people. But, your point about the shift workers, our producer Leo faces that every single week, because he works the overnight shifts on weekends, and then starting on Monday, he tries to wake up at 9 a.m. and have like a pretty normal day so that he can try and cooperate. But imagine that balance every week, when half of your days are just spent trying to become a night owl. It's very tough on you, not just physically, emotionally, mentally, all of these things. So it's really important to have this conversation. And just to recap, if you're joining us, we're in conversation with Brian Douglas. He's a photographer based in Ontario, and we're talking about the 5 a.m. project that he's been cataloging here. So one of the things that I was so curious about is that, first of all, these are amazing photos that you did capture. I imagine that it would have been pretty interesting for you as a photographer to look through the lens and see whether it's at a hospital or a night, when you're at at a busy intersection, what's supposed to be a busy intersection late at night, there's no cars there. When you're at a factory and you're on the line, which you would imagine was busy at some point, but it's completely silent and eerie. What was that experience for you, trying to just capture that moment? Was it difficult, or maybe easier than you thought it would be?
I think the most difficult piece for me for the project, and I mean, it got easier as I met more and more individuals, was the portrait. Because the other thing that I think people who have seen the project, or who I've talked to about it, they don't realize that all of the individuals that I had the opportunity to photograph, they were also still working. So I had at times maybe 15, 20 minutes of dedicated time with that individual. And I've never claimed to be a portrait photographer. This project was my first venture into portraits. I hadn't shot a portrait since like grade 10 high school. So it was like decades since I actually shot a portrait. But you have to build a little bit of a connection and a rapport with the person to make them feel comfortable to take their picture. So that was the most difficult part, was just quickly establishing a connection, trying to, again, explain to them what my goal and why I was even there, right? Because some of the people are like, why are you doing this? Why are you showing up here at like 5 a.m? Because I always went during the overnight shift, often around the 5 a.m. mark. And so lots of them are just curious as to why I wanted to do it. But yeah, so the portrait piece was hard just from a time standpoint, and again, establishing that quick connection and that rapport. But the setting shots that I paired with them, those were fairly easy, because you're right, like the intersections are empty, or the lines were much quieter, the halls are empty, so you can really like easily get a sense of what it felt like in those spaces, in those moments. And I've got lots of that feedback from people. Like, I kind of really get a feel looking at your images around what it must have felt like to be there at that point in time and at that hour of the morning.
Welcome back to The Shift. We are continuing our conversation here with Brian Douglas, a photographer from the Kitchener-Waterloo area of Ontario, and what he worked on over the past number of weeks and months called the 5 a.m. Project, where he's cataloging the overnight workers of Canada. And the fact that, hey, you probably listening right now understand overnight workers don't get a lot of love from everyday society. And it's important to note the incredible work that all of you do in keeping the Canadian economy moving forward when the rest of the world is sound asleep in bed. So continuing that conversation here with Brian Douglas. I'd be remiss if I didn't just make a happy suggestion, because a bulk of our listeners, regular listeners and contributors who call in or text the show are truckers, and they're all over the country. And as you would imagine, their work hours are pretty demanding. Often, they're working straight through the night, trying to make their destination as quickly as possible. And so on behalf of all the truckers that listen to the show, I'm sure they're in their cars listening right now thinking, you got to speak with a trucker. You got to speak with a trucker and take a shot of our big rigs, and we'll be happy to share you our stories. But I suppose, as you were talking about, like trying to build connections with the individuals that you want to sort of catalog for this project, it's not easy to just like cold call people out of the blue and be like, hey, I just want to drop in for a little bit during your shift and just sort of take a photo and get to know you a little bit. Was there one story in particular or one individual who really just resonated with you, what experiences they had to share?
They were all so different. I think all of them were cold calls.
Yeah. And that's not easy. That's a tough thing to do.
All of these were cold. I think only a couple ended up happening just as the project expanded. People kind of made a few links on my behalf. I think the one story that really stands out to me was Doug. So he was the brewer. He was at that time, I think it was 19 years he had been brewing overnight shift. And what I loved about Doug was, so I arranged his portrait through his managers. So I went through like the corporate office, and they said, you know what, Doug would be a perfect person. He's been here for decades. He knows his stuff. He'd make a good portrait and a good representation of our company. So we got that all arranged. We were good to go. And then they forgot to tell Doug.
Really?
Yeah. So I show up, I think it was like 3 or 4 in the morning. I show up. I'm walking around the brewery. Nobody's opening doors. Everything's kind of locked up. I got my backpack, my tripod, like what's going on. I finally find a door that's kind of propped open, probably where he kind of sneaks out every now and then to get some fresh air. So it's open. So I'm like, all right, well, Doug knows I'm supposed to be coming. I'm just going to let myself in. So I let myself into the brewery, wandering around the floor. I have no idea where I'm going because I've never been in this space before. Like, I'd been to the brewery before to buy beer, but that's not the production side of it. And so I'm just wandering around kind of the basement area. And then all of a sudden, kind of out of the shadows, I see this guy. So I just kind of make myself known, like, hey, Doug. And he's just kind of like deer in headlight moment, like, who are you and why are you in my brewery right now? But he was super gracious, and he kind of just hopped right on and just kind of got into it. He resonated with me because, again, he was one of those straight night guys, and he just said, as an individual, he liked the quiet. He liked the opportunity just to be in his head, just to do his thing, and not to have to worry about the hustle and the bustle of what tends to go on during the day. Like, managers aren't there, other employees aren't there, there aren't customers in and out of the shop side of things. It was just kind of him. There was one other guy that he worked with, and they just did their thing. He just made beer, and he was completely happy and content. And that really resonated with me, and it made sense, right? Why some people find that the night shift works for them.
Mm-hmm.
It just fits their personality. And you spoke a little bit to the mental health piece, right? And I think he had the opportunity to make that choice, right? And then that worked for his well-being and it worked for his mental health. Whereas he knew as a person, it wouldn't be as easy for him the day shift because there was so many other factors that, for whatever reason, in his world and as of his story, that nights worked for him.
Right.
So that really stood out for me as just one example of why nights worked.
Yeah. I mean, I do talk about the challenges of working nights, but if it works and it seems to click and your life actually maybe benefits from working the night shift, that's what keeps you in it, right? And that's what makes you think, okay, you know what? It's not really the worst thing in the world. When I go grocery shopping late at night, I don't need to worry about there being too busy lineups or anything like that. So I think it makes a lot of sense why there are certain advantages for people that are looking to work or end up working the overnight shift. Now, one thing that you wanted to let people know about is that you're not truly finished with this project because there's one particular job that you're looking to catalog. I'm not sure if you said this in jest, but I started thinking, like, do I know anyone who's a worm picker? Because that's one thing that you would apparently be so fascinated to try and catalog for this project.
So there's still a few on my list of kind of jobs that I want to get. Trucker is 100% on my list, and interestingly enough, I've only had a few no's over the course of the time I've been doing that. And so far, the companies that I've approached for trucking have said no, which was interesting to me. So part of me, I think I'm just going to have to find personally a trucker as opposed to going through a corporate office. And that's just the nature of the beast sometimes, right? But a worm picker, like I said, I've told my wife that if I found a worm picker, I could probably happily package 5 a.m. up. I've always thought about maybe putting it into a book or something, but I could package it up nicely and walk away and feel satisfied. Worm picking, it's just like I have the image in my head. I see it when I think about it. Just, there are these people out there, it's more of a spring, summer type of seasonal employment.
Mm-hmm.
But with the headlamps, their can or their bucket, and they're just in farmers' fields, just scanning the ground. And so I see this portrait of mainly just light shining down a person's face with kind of almost silhouetted in the background. And I would be fascinated to spend some time with a worm picker and to capture their portrait. Because again, like when I was talking to Huffington Post, like she was like, I've never even heard of a worm picker. and then she's like, but it makes total sense.
Mm-hmm.
So, and again, I think that was part of, again, what this project for me was about. Again, like there's so many, industries and so many employment types that we're not even aware of. And that fascinates me too, right? But yeah, worm picker, if anybody out there in Ontario is a worm picker or owns a worm picking company, like reach out, because I will travel outside of Waterloo to take your portrait.
This is something that you're serious about. So if, like he said, if you're a worm picker, you got to get in touch. Now, on that note, what is the best way for people that are listening to try and check out the 5 a.m. project? Plug in your social media and any links that you got to share here.
Yeah, so you can check it out on right now Huffington Post has a selection, and you can just Google Brian Douglas 5 a.m. project. Or Board Panda has a larger collection too. Again, Brian Douglas, Board Panda. If you go to @BrianR.Douglas, so don't forget the R in there, on Instagram, you'll see a link in my bio that will lead you to a collection, to another Instagram account with just some of the 5 a.m. pieces, or bdouglasphotography.com. Is my website, and again, it's got a collection of the portraits on my website too, and I haven't uploaded all of them, so there are still some more to show up online. So stay tuned for some more portraits in the near future.
Looking forward to it. And Brian, if you ever end up making that book, just to sort of finalize the project. More than happy to get you back on as the official author of the 5 a.m. project. So we really want to thank you for your time here tonight. And it's been a fascinating thing to just be looking through all the photos and all the stories. And on behalf of the listeners of The Shift, who are exactly that audience that you're connecting with the 5 a.m. project, thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. And thank you to everybody out there right now who's listening, who's at work, who's doing really important work to keep the fabric of our society going. You are taken for granted. The work you do isn't always glamorous, but I truly personally appreciate everything you guys are doing. And I hope this project, if you do get a chance to see it, that you get that I'm honoring you in this project in some way, shape, or form.
It's the Shift Podcast.
Let's get into it. It's time to learn Portuguese.
Hola, Shift Heads. It's time to learn Portuguese with Leonardo.
Ooh. Lovely song. All right, so here we go. Teacher Leo ready to go, and it's another episode of Learning Portuguese with Leo. We've gotten some requests from our listeners, so maybe we'll go to the requests first, because that's more important, Leo. What do you think?
Yeah, you gotta please those who are supporting us at this time.
All right, from Jim. Jim wants to know how you say, quote, "Hey, I don't speak Spanish. I'm from Brazil," which is a fair point. Brazilians speak Portuguese, which is why we're doing this.
They do, and because they're surrounded by several the Spanish-speaking world in Latin America. Most people don't know. I've many times, especially when I go down the U.S., they said they don't have enough. Like most of them don't have enough knowledge about geographics. I say I'm from Brazil, and they start talking Spanish with me, and I respond in Spanish to them because I like talking Spanish as well. But yes, it is a problem. So to translate Jim's request, hey, I don't speak Spanish. I'm from Brazil. You would say, "Hey, eu não falo espanhol. Sou do Brasil."
Slow it down. So A is still pretty much the same. A.
Eu não falo espanhol.
Eu não falo. Eu
não falo.
Eu não falo.
Espanhol. Sou do Brasil. Yeah, that's.
Eu não falo espanhol. Sou do Brasil.
Yeah.
Okay, all right.
Get it there. Yeah.
I like that. We got this request from Catherine saying, "Keep your stick on the ice." I like that.
Yeah, so mantenha o seu taco no gelo.
Mantenha
o seu taco no gelo. Taco is a stick.
Taco is stick?
Yes.
I love that.
Yeah, that's a Taco Tuesday, right? So, taco is stick in Portuguese.
The spelling is the same, taco.
Yes.
It just has a very different meaning.
Yes. Taco is a stick, is taco. Ice is gelo. And the verb keep is mantenha.
Manteia. Okay. All right. We're learning here from this. All right. Now, Ian had a reverse request where he sent in a sentence entirely in Portuguese and he wants you to translate it. I'm not even going to try to pronounce it.
Yeah. Actually, he sent us. He requested in Spanish. Actually,
that's Spanish.
Which is not a problem. You can request in Spanish from me too. So he says, "Yo quiero llamar a tu amigo Leo porque él es inteligente." So this is Spanish, which means in English. By the way, he's requesting for me. He's saying, "I want to call your friend Leo because he is intelligent." So he wrote in Spanish. I just translated to English. Now translating this to Portuguese. So here we go. Eu quero chamar o seu amigo Léo. Seu amigo Léo, porque ele é inteligente.
Okay, I'm not even.
Try.
Yeah, I
Too
can't.
many languages.
Too many. All right. If you got more requests, keep them coming. 877-399-9898. Learning some Portuguese here with our Brazilian-Canadian technical producer, Leonardo Coelho. Now, I've got some here that I already wanted to learn. So let's get into this one. I think it's a little easier. Sorry for the delay.
Desculpe pelo atraso.
Desculpe pelo atraso.
Yes, desculpe pelo atraso.
Disculpe pelo atraso. Sorry for the delay. And that, of course, is in conjunction with the fact that the Pfizer vaccine is going to be delayed, which isn't the best news, but we're trying to at least find a silver lining and maybe learn Portuguese out of it. Welcome to Canada.
Bem-vindo ao Canadá.
Bem-vindo ao Canada.
Yeah, so Canada, there's a tricky thing because in English, the stress syllable, it's Canada. Mm-hmm. Now in Portuguese, when you say Canada, the stress syllable is da. So it's Canada.
Canada.
Yes.
All right, I like that. Bem-vindo ao Canada. And last, please vote.
Vote, por favor.
Vote, por favor.
Exactly.
Vote, por favor. And we bring this up because an election has been called in Newfoundland and Labrador for next month. So that's coming, and you're about to get into the whole election process in the Maritimes.
Thanks for listening to the Shift Podcast.
Make sure you subscribe, rate, and review the show and share with anyone you like. Get it on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, and CuriousCast.ca.